I woke up to the sound of crackling flames. At first, I thought I was dreaming, maybe a campfire, maybe a summer barbecue. But the thick, acrid smoke pouring through my bedroom window told me otherwise. My chest tightened as I threw the sheets off and ran to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. My motorcycle, my police-issued, state-owned motorcycle, was engulfed in flames in my own driveway. Fire danced across its frame, licking at the pavement like some hellish bonfire. My first instinct was to grab the fire extinguisher, but even as I stumbled toward the door, I knew it was too late. The flames were too high, the damage already done. The heat hit my face the second I stepped outside, my bare feet smacking against the cool concrete. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared at the smoldering wreck, but beneath the shock, a slow-burning rage started to rise. That was when I heard it. Laughter. I turned my head toward the house across the street, where a small group of people stood in the shadows of a perfectly trimmed lawn. Wine glasses in hand, they clinked them together as if celebrating. My jaw clenched as recognition set in. It was the HOA board. Mrs. Pennington, their ever-so-smug president, stood front and center, whispering something to the others before flashing a self-satisfied grin in my direction. "Next time, follow the rules, Mr. Dawson," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension. For a moment I was frozen in place. Not out of fear, not out of shock, but because I was trying to comprehend just how far these lunatics had gone. I had dealt with criminals, reckless drivers, and the occasional back-alley lunatic, but never had I seen suburban homeowners commit an outright felony over something this stupid. 2 days ago, these same people had knocked on my door with a welcome letter, a piece of paper wrapped in a veiled threat. The Homeowners Association, or as I had come to think of them, the neighborhood mafia, had made it clear that joining was highly encouraged. They spoke in that rehearsed, fake-friendly tone that made my skin crawl. They wanted control over my property, over my house, over where I parked my own damn vehicle. I had politely declined, not thinking much of it. Then the fines started rolling in. First, a notice for my grass being a half-inch too long. Then, another one claiming my police motorcycle was a non-compliant vehicle and needed to be stored out of sight. A $500 fine. I had laughed at that one. Laughed and tossed it in the trash where it belonged. I wasn't part of their ridiculous little club, and they had no authority over me. Apparently, they hadn't taken that well. The fire department arrived within minutes, and soon my driveway was a chaotic mess of flashing lights and firefighters battling the flames. The smell of burnt rubber and scorched metal filled the air. I stood there, arms crossed, watching in silence as my bike, the very machine I had used to chase down criminals, respond to emergencies, and serve my community, was reduced to twisted, blackened scrap. One of the firefighters, a guy I knew from town, walked over and let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jack. What the hell happened?" I exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of my neck. "HOA happened." His brows shot up. "You serious?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth hurt. I knew exactly who had done this. The security cameras on my property had captured every damn second. Hours later, when the fire was out and the wreckage was all that remained, I sat in my living room reviewing the footage. My fingers tapped against the table as I watched the grainy black and white video play out. The HOA board, yes, the entire damn board, had crept onto my property in the dead of night. I watched as one of them, some balding guy in a sweater vest, poured gasoline over my bike like a psychopath. Another, a woman I recognized as Mrs. Pennington's right hand, lit the match. My eye twitched. There it was. Video evidence. They had set fire to a police vehicle. Not just any vehicle, but a state-owned law enforcement motorcycle. A felony. A massive felony. And here's the best part. They had no idea who I really was. Sure, they knew I was a cop. They might have assumed I was just some low-level officer with a beat patrol and a bad attitude. But they didn't know I was a state trooper. They didn't know I had jurisdiction beyond their little suburban fiefdom. They had no clue they had just committed a federal-level crime right under the nose of someone who could bring their entire world crashing down. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile creeping onto my face. Oh, they had really screwed up this time. The next morning, as the sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and blue, I stood outside with my arms crossed, watching as the HOA board gathered for their usual morning gossip session near the community garden. Mrs. Pennington, still dressed in her pearl necklace and power suit like she was running for office, shot me a triumphant look. "Such a shame about your motorcycle," she called out, fake sympathy oozing from every syllable. "Perhaps next time, you'll reconsider our community guidelines." I smiled. A slow, deliberate, wolfish grin. "Oh, I definitely will," I replied, my tone light, almost playful. "In fact, I'd love to discuss it with all of you. Maybe even over at the station." She blinked. "The station?" I pulled out my badge, flipping it open just enough for the sunlight to glint off it. Her expression changed instantly. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her face, so fast I thought she might faint right there on the sidewalk. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence evaporating like mist in the sun. "Yeah," I continued, enjoying the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "You know, seeing as how you and your little gang committed arson against state property, I figure we should have a proper chat about it. Maybe with a few of my colleagues. You know, the ones who arrest people for felonies." Mrs. Pennington took a step back. Then another. The other HOA members looked like deer caught in headlights. I let out a slow chuckle. "See you soon, folks." And with that, I turned and walked back into my house, leaving them to wallow in their incoming doom. Oh, this was going to be fun. The HOA members were panicking. It was obvious from the way they huddled together outside Mrs. Pennington's house, whispering in frantic tones. Some of them kept glancing at my house, their faces a mix of dread and confusion. I watched from my porch, sipping my morning coffee, enjoying the sight of their entire world unraveling before them. The same people who had smirked and laughed as they set my motorcycle on fire now looked like scared rats trapped in a sinking ship. And the best part? They still didn't know how deep in trouble they actually were. I had spent the entire night reviewing the security footage, making copies, and preparing my next move. It wasn't just about revenge, though, let's be honest, that part was pretty satisfying. This was about justice, about making sure these power-hungry, self-important busybodies learned that they weren't above the law. They had played their little suburban mafia game for too long, terrorizing homeowners with their ridiculous rules and outrageous fines, thinking no one would ever stand up to them. Well, they had finally messed with the wrong guy. By mid-morning, I got a call from the station. My buddy, Officer Martinez, had already seen the footage. His reaction was priceless. He had laughed for a full minute before saying, "You mean to tell me a bunch of soccer moms and retirees committed first-degree arson on a state trooper's bike? Oh man, this is gonna be fun." He promised to handle the paperwork while I prepared for the next step. The HOA meeting was scheduled for noon. I didn't want to miss it. So, after a quick breakfast, I got dressed in my casual off-duty clothes, grabbed my badge, and headed down the street. The meeting was being held at the community clubhouse, the same place where they had probably toasted to my misfortune the night before. When I walked through the doors, the room fell silent. Every single HOA board member was there, sitting at their long polished table, looking at me like a ghost had just walked in. Mrs. Pennington was seated at the center, her expression carefully neutral, but the tight grip she had on her pen gave away her nerves. The other members shifted in their seats, avoiding my gaze, suddenly much less confident than they had been when they were setting my property on fire. "Mr. Dawson," Mrs. Pennington said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I took my time walking up to the table, letting the silence stretch between us. Then, I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around for them to see. The footage played in full clarity, The gasoline, the match, the laughter, the flames. The color drained from Mrs. Pennington's face. Someone in the back let out a small, strangled gasp. "I think we need to have a little chat," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. The reaction was instant. The man in the sweater vest, the same one who had been a little too eager with the gasoline, shot to his feet. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "You can't just—" "Sit down," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a tone I usually reserved for criminals. He sat. Mrs. Pennington took a shaky breath. "Mr. Dawson, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this." "Oh, I'm sure there is," I said, crossing my arms. "I'd love to hear it. Maybe you can explain why a group of homeowners decided to commit felony arson over a parking dispute." No one said a word. I let the silence drag on before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen. In about an hour, officers will be arriving at your homes with arrest warrant. You see, unlike you, I don't just make up rules and fine people for existing. I actually enforce real laws. And setting fire to a police vehicle? That's a serious crime. So, congratulations, you all just turned your little HOA into a criminal organization." The panic in the room was palpable. One woman clutched her pearls like she was about to faint. Another man was sweating so hard it looked like he had run a marathon. But Mrs. Pennington? She was still trying to keep control. This is ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked the usual confidence. "This is all a misunderstanding." I smirked. "Right. A misunderstanding. You accidentally poured gasoline on my bike? You accidentally lit the match?" She licked her lips, searching for an argument. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make the hair on her neck stand up. "Tell you what. Why don't you call my captain and explain to him why you thought it was a good idea to burn a state-owned motorcycle? Maybe he'll see your side of things. Maybe he won't press for the maximum sentence." Her composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but there was none. The other HOA members were shifting uncomfortably, clearly realizing that she had led them straight into disaster. Then the doors opened, and in walked two uniformed officers. Martinez was in the lead, looking entirely too amused at the whole situation. "Good afternoon, folks," he said cheerfully. "I've got some paperwork here with your names on it." Absolute chaos erupted. Some members tried to protest, but they were quickly silenced by the sight of handcuffs being pulled from belts. The woman who had clutched her pearls actually did faint this time, slumping dramatically against her chair. One man tried to run, only to be intercepted by another officer at the door. It was a full-blown meltdown. Mrs. Pennington stood up, her face red with fury. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "We are upstanding members of this community. You can't do this." Martinez just grinned. "Ma'am, you burned a cop's bike. And we can absolutely do this." One by one, the HOA members were handcuffed and escorted out. Some cried, some screamed, some begged for leniency. None was given. As I watched them being led to the squad cars, I couldn't help but shake my head. These people had spent years lording over others, thinking they were untouchable. They had bullied homeowners, fined them for absurd reasons, and acted as if they were above the law. But now they were just criminals. Martinez clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said, chuckling, "I've seen a lot of stupid criminals in my time, but this takes the cake." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in days. "Yeah," I said, watching as Mrs. Pennington was shoved into the back of a squad car, still screaming about how this was unfair. "It really does." As the last of the HOA members were driven away, I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet, sweet scent of justice. The neighborhood was finally free. And damn, did it feel good. The neighborhood was quieter than it had been in years. Without the constant presence of the HOA lurking over every minor detail, things started to feel normal again. People mowed their lawns without fear of fines, parked their cars in their own driveways without receiving citations, and, most importantly, no one was burning down state property in the middle of the night. The ridiculous reign of the HOA was over, and it was about time. The court case that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. The entire town had heard about the incident, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing, and I had to fight the urge to laugh as I watched Mrs. Pennington march in, dressed in her finest clothes, acting as if she was walking into a gala instead of a criminal trial. She carried herself with the same smug attitude she always had, as if she truly believed that she was above the law. The other HOA members, however, were a different story. They looked like they had aged a decade overnight, their faces pale and filled with regret. The prosecution didn't hold back. The security footage was played in full view of the entire courtroom. Every moment was crystal clear. The gasoline being poured, the match being lit, the triumphant little celebration they had afterward. The gasps from the audience were audible. Even the judge had to pause for a moment before shaking his head in disbelief. Mrs. Pennington tried to argue that it was all just a misunderstanding. She claimed that they were simply trying to enforce community standards, and that my refusal to comply had left them with no other choice. When that didn't work, she shifted tactics and tried to play the victim, claiming that they had been intimidated by me and that the fire was an accident. The judge was having none of it. "You expect me to believe," he said, rubbing his temples, "that 6 grown adults accidentally poured gasoline onto a police motorcycle, accidentally lit a match, and then accidentally stood around laughing while it burned?" Mrs. Pennington stammered, her carefully rehearsed words failing her. The judge didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the jury, who didn't even need to deliberate for long. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Every single one of them. Sentencing day was even better. Some of them got probation, hefty fines, and community service. A few, including Mrs. Pennington and her closest lackeys, got actual jail time. She had been so certain she could talk her way out of it, but the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, reality hit her hard. The woman who had ruled over this neighborhood with an iron fist was now just another criminal being escorted out of the courtroom. The fallout from the case was massive. The HOA was effectively dissolved overnight. With most of its board members behind bars or too ashamed to show their faces in public, there was no one left to keep it running. The community held a vote, and in record time, the HOA was officially disbanded. People celebrated like it was a national holiday. Someone even set off fireworks in their backyard, something that would have earned them a fine just a week earlier. The best part? The funds that had once been used to pay for the HOA's ridiculous rules and enforcement were now being put to better use. After some discussion with the neighborhood, we decided to turn the old HOA office into something useful, a community park. But not just any park. It was going to be a barbecue and gathering spot, a place where people could enjoy their own property without fear of being harassed over fence heights or the color of their front doors. I made sure to personally oversee the demolition of the HOA office. Watching that building get torn down was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Gone were the endless stacks of fines, the patronizing newsletters, the ridiculous regulations about mailbox styles. In their place would be picnic tables, a grill station, and a giant sign that read, HOA Free Zone. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same land that had once been used to control people was now being used to bring them together. The first community barbecue was a massive success. Families who had been at odds for years over petty HOA disputes sat together, laughing, eating, and enjoying the freedom they had fought for. Even some of the police officers who had helped with the arrests showed up, Martinez included. He took one look at the banner I had hung over the grill station and burst out laughing. "You really named this the anti-HOA cookout?" he said, shaking his head as he grabbed a plate of food. "Damn right I did," I replied, flipping a burger. "Gotta make sure no one ever forgets what happened here." People started sharing their horror stories about the HOA, trading tales of absurd fines and power-hungry board members. One guy talked about how he had been fined for having an improperly shaped flower bed. Another told a story about getting a citation because his trash can was visible for exactly 3 minutes past the HOA's strict pickup window. The more stories I heard, the more I realized just how much people had suffered under their ridiculous rule. But now they were free. As the sun started to set, I sat back in my chair, watching the community come together in a way it never had before. Kids were playing, neighbors were talking, and for the first time since I moved here, I actually felt like I belonged. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a new face. A guy, probably in his 40s, walking around the park, looking at the setup with interest. He eventually made his way over to where I was sitting and extended a hand. "Nice place you got here," he said. "I just moved into the neighborhood. Name's Greg." "Jack," I said, shaking his hand. He gestured toward the banner. "So, what happened to the old HOA?" I chuckled, glancing around at the happy, relaxed crowd. "They had a little accident with fire." Greg laughed, clearly thinking I was joking. "Well, sounds like this place is better off without them. Hey, speaking of which, have you guys thought about starting a new HOA? You know, one that's a little more reasonable." I set my drink down, turned to look him dead in the eye, and grinned. "Greg, I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear that." The look of panic on his face was priceless. He held up his hands, laughing nervously. "Kidding. Totally kidding." I handed him a plate of barbecue. "Good. Now eat before I start writing fines." The night ended with fireworks, laughter, and a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. I had moved into this neighborhood looking for quiet, but I had found something even better. I had found a community worth fighting for. And in the end, that was better than any fine-free lawn or perfectly measured flower bed. As I leaned back and took a deep breath, I realized one thing: I had won. And damn, did victory taste good.